Everyone. Welcome to this technical conference in docket 2024.05.053 regarding NorthWestern Energy's application for authority to increase retail electric and natural gas utility service rates and for approval of electric and natural gas service schedules and allocated cost of service and rate design. My name is Will Rosequist. I am the Regulatory Division Administrator at the Montana Public Service Commission. This technical conference is being hosted by Commission staff for the purpose of allowing intervening parties and Commission staff to obtain a better understanding of NorthWestern's new Microsoft Excel-based cost of service and cost allocation model, so that the parties and staff can evaluate the impacts of NorthWestern's selected cost allocation approaches. The technical conference is not intended to be a discussion of the merits of NorthWestern's selected cost allocation approaches, but rather the functionality available to users within the model. All Zoom participants have control over their microphones so that you can take yourselves off mute to ask a question at any time. We would just ask that everyone be vigilant about turning your microphones off when not asking a question to avoid reductions in sound quality for other attendees. And when you ask a question, if you could identify yourself and the party you represent, that would also be helpful. This technical conference is expected to go or is scheduled to go until 4 p.m. Mountain Time, and it is being live streamed and recorded. With that, it's my understanding that at this point, the only interveners who are participating via Zoom are the large customer group and Walmart. But if there is a representative of any other party on the Zoom meeting, would you please let me know right now?
Yes, this is Michael Dupree. I'm a consultant for the Montana Consumer Council.
Oh, great. Thank you. Anyone else? Okay. We have a fairly manageable number of people participating. So, Michael, thanks for introducing yourself from MCC. I think we'll just take a minute to get introductions from the other interveners on in the meeting, and then we'll turn it over to NorthWestern and they can introduce their staff and jump into the overview of the model. So why don't we go with large customer group? Do you guys want to introduce yourselves?
Good afternoon. Thor Nelson with the large customer group. Also, I see Nick Stoffel and Justin Bieber with the LCG.
Great, thank you. And Walmart? Is there somebody from Walmart? Okay, maybe not. How about Commission staff? Do you want to go ahead and just introduce yourselves real quickly? Mike, you want to start?
Yes, hello. My name is Mike Dalton, and I'm a rate analyst at the Montana Public Service Commission.
Hello, this is Haley Gobert, also a rate analyst with the Montana PSC.
Okay. All right. I guess at this point, I will turn it over to you, NorthWestern, to introduce yourselves and then get us going on the model. Thanks, everyone.
Hi, everybody. This is Charlie Lane, Director of Regulatory Affairs here at NorthWestern Energy. Thanks, everybody, for being on. We're looking forward to this technical conference to walk through how our new model works. Here in the conference room, we've got Glenda Gibson, Josh Reisig, and Marissa Bentley. And I'll let Glenda introduce our consultants.
Yeah, we also have representatives of MCR who helped us develop this model. So Cindy, Dave Thompson, and Nikhil.
And I guess at this point, we can kick it off to them and let them give a introduction and a presentation.
And just so you know, I guess Cindy and Charlie and then the folks from MCR all have screen sharing permissions in case you need it.
Sounds good. Thanks. I'm Dave Thompson. Cindy Menhorn is online here too. She's responsible for our regulatory practice. I'm responsible for our financial planning and advisory practice. And Nikhil is a consultant who's worked with us on developing the models. I plan to walk through a brief PowerPoint presentation, which we can make available after the meeting, and then just walk through the model. Feel free to interrupt me with questions. As Will mentioned up front, our job is just to walk through the model and how it works. So, any questions relative to why certain allocators were chosen or other things that's not this meeting, those should be directed to NorthWestern and the appropriate venue. So let me share. Okay. Is that flowing through? Awesome.
Yeah.
Okay. So just a little bit of background. We developed the cost of service tool we call COST because it's a nice catchy name and easy to remember. We developed it a handful of years ago, mainly because the existing products on the market were not very transparent. They used computer code to generate results. Our clients were interested in having models that were more flexible and were more transparent to allow other parties to be able to see, where the data was flowing and how the numbers were developed. So we've developed the model really to enable utility staff to manage that model without the need for much consulting resources. So once it's in place, they're pretty well able to manage the model, update it for future rate cases, et cetera. It can be quickly adapted to changes in data sets. We're happy to show how that works. And then a big focus of this presentation will be how external stakeholders that have access to the model really can follow the logic and then test alternate assumptions. We developed this with NorthWestern to tie out to their prior rate case, their prior model, the MAC model. And once we get that tied up, we then work with them to develop and get the data in place and make sure everything was working appropriately for the filing for this case. Just a real high level overview of how it works. What we do is we work with our clients to really just go straight from their work papers so they're not having to develop alternate sources of data. So we work with them to get the work papers set up in a way that we can load them up into our model without having to do too much surgery on those to make them work. So we're able to move pretty quickly with their existing work papers. We bring them into the model and we utilize a mapping spot, and we'll walk through that. We're really doing is to get that data lined up in a way that we can use it to load it in to begin to do the work, the cost of service model. So from there, that data flows through to the functionalize tab where we functionalize it, and it is then interconnected with the allocations. As you know, functional allocators are a combination of direct assign as well as allocators that are developed off of the functionalization, like net plant factors, et cetera. And then once the functionalize is completed, that data flows into the cost of service. as well as the class allocators. Again, the cost of service will have all of the information available by class and by function. And then the class allocators are the combination of energy demand, customer allocators, along with those allocators that come off of the cost of service sheet, like wages, salaries, plan allocators, etc. So that's a high level view, and we'll jump into the details here. Thought it'd be useful to provide some primer on some of the Excel. For the most part, the model uses straightforward Excel, but it is useful to understand a couple of the functions that we use to enable the flexibility within the model. One of those is the indirect command. So indirect is a function in Excel that basically converts text into something that Excel recognizes as a formula. So we use it often to help provide flexibility when data sources change. So if we don't do any linking within these models to other workbooks, what we do is we load the data up. And so to do that, we need to have some method to make it easy to, when those things change, their sources. So that's a primary reason why we use it. So a simple example, I have a spreadsheet up here where we've got some data. Are you able to see the spreadsheet, by the way? Okay, thank you. We've got data on a sheet called plant, data on a sheet called revenue. If we look at our sort of normal formula, we would just say equals plant B1 plus revenue B1. But we use indirect instead, we get the same result. Now it creates a little bit more of a complicated formula, but it allows us to change the text on here to change where those come from. So if I change this to revenue plus revenue, it's going to give me a different result. And so what indirect does is it looks at the text and it says, okay, revenue B1, that's in here as text. I'm going to convert that to something I can use as a formula. And we use this quite a bit in there. In the map, and we'll show that in a second. All right, moving on. We use sum ifs quite a bit too. So sum ifs is kind of standard formula. You use it a lot when you're looking at multiple data items that you want to roll up into one. So oftentimes in cost of service, there's a lot of detail on the work papers. We don't need quite as much detail, so we'll bucket that into an area and use sum ifs to roll that together. So an example would be if I looked on the functionalize tab of the cost model. I'm in the electric model here. That's the one we're going to walk through. If I'm in F10, I'm just doing a sum if, and I'm looking at a range. So I'm looking at the source map. Column I is where I have that data. See all the numbers are in column I. And then I'm looking at my criteria range is going to be column G in the source map. And so I'm going to be looking for C10, which is the word organization in column G. And I'm going to be looking for this FERC account 301 in column H. And that's going to provide me with, I'm looking for the word organization, column G, the FERC account 301, and it's going to pull that data from column I, which is of course the same number. Go back to this. And then we use the sum ifs with indirect, and we use this a lot on the source mapping. And really what we're doing there is trying to give flexibility to be able to adapt to any changes that might happen. So if we look back on that same component on the source map, this you see this sum ifs with the indirect. When I bring that formula up, we can see this indirect is I'm creating that same formula but using text. So I'm looking at a range, and so I'm building up my lookup using the words here. So my source sheet is going to be the electric plant and service work paper. I've got my data source, so where the number exists, it's going to be in column I. Where the description is for that is going to be in column A. And that source sheet has a different way of describing that than we do for the cost of service. So we use that description because that's what's on the work paper to enable us to get to that number. If for some reason in the future that work paper changed, or we're looking at, maybe if that data ends up in a different column, it makes it easy for us to change that column, and that's why we use that function. So in this case, you look at the indirect, at the text, where we're pulling our numbers from is the electric plant and service, column I, and I go to that work paper, and I can find that column I, electric plant service is my work paper, and there's the number. Then the last formula we'll talk about is index. We use index along with the match function. Typically, that's when we're looking for one specific piece of data, because that match basically says, find the first match. And so when we know that we just have one piece of data to find, we use index match. It's a nice, sufficient formula within Excel. So an example of this would be like on our functionalize and how we're pulling the functional allocators through to do the math. So if I look again at the same, let's look at this number here, right here. So the production non-energy function. So here we see index with the match. So basically what's going on here is that the match is looking in, first off, our index, the function that has the data we want is in a table we call func alloc, which is the functional allocators tab. And it's essentially all of the percentages for each functional allocator. And those are the identifiers for the functional allocators. And we're looking to match. So M10 is going to be our allocator. So that W wages and salaries excluding A and G. And so it's looking to find M10 in the list of functional allocator names. And it's going to find it down here in row 50. And which is for the table, it's the 48th row of that table. And then go back to functionalize. It's going to be in the first column. So that first column matches the production energy non-CU4 function, which is this one here. So basically it's finding that, and it says, bring back 3.32% as the allocator to function. So we will make, again, this available for you. So if there's any questions about how these formulas work, question from Michael.
Yeah, hey, this is Michael Dupree, the consultant for the Montana Consumer Council. I
Yep.
noticed that you use a drop down for the functional allocators. If a party was to add new allocators, say at the bottom of your functional allocation table, would that automatically be updated in the drop down list, or how would you edit that so that so that you could use other allocators not used by the company?
Yep, good question. There is space, so these, if you add a functional allocator below these names here, all the way through into the gray area, those should get picked up by the dropdown.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Yep. And on class allocator, there's not as much, but there's a few blank spaces in here which you could co-opt in the class allocators if you needed to do that same thing. Okay, going back. So now let's go through the model, just a quick layout of the model. Starting from the navigation, so we just have sort of simple navigation in here. Just click on a hyperlink and it takes you to that. There we go. And then a return button. The import tab is for our clients to load up their work papers. So when there's alternate work papers, we utilize this. It's a very simple macro that loads it up. It's really the only macro in the model. The control tab provides just a handful of high-level inputs, so the rates of return, tax rates, and then a handful of manual entries. We needed to have a few manual entries to accommodate the jurisdictional view of the world. And by the way, I'm just going to walk through the electric ACOS model. If you understand how the electric one works, the gas one is laid out almost exactly the same, but it doesn't have the extra component we needed for Colstrip 4. And the JCOS is identical to the ACOS, with the difference is this switch up here switches it from embedded cost to jurisdictional cost mode. So if there's any additional questions about those other models, let me know. We can talk about them, but I'm not planning to go through them. We have just a simple checks tab again to load up when we load up the data to make sure everything's tying out. The summary, this is the combination for the electric model, and it's really just at the high level, at the summary level for the results when we combine both the Montana Electric and the CU4. Then there's individual cost of service tabs for Montana Electric without CU4 and then just CU4. We have our functionalized tab, and I'm going to go into details in both functionalized and the cost of service. So I'll come back to those in a second. Class allocators for CU4 and for not CU4, the functional allocators and the jurisdictional allocators. We have our source map, and that's really where I'm going to start. So we already talked about how it works. So in this case, we took a look at, and we'll just sort of follow an individual number. So, we looked at the work paper where this came from. We also had, because this model, we had to separate the CU4 from the rest of the company. You'll see this column here on the source map that identifies those CU4 components. So let's take a look again. Sort of follow the number here and how it flows from the work paper to here, which we walked through already. And then we go to the functionalization tab where this column F is the total company. So really column F corresponds to the revenue requirement and corresponds to the total company data that's coming from the map. So in this case, it's doing that sum ifs to find the 301 organization piece. If there was a Colstrip component, it would be here and would be netted off. In that case, there's nothing. This is the spot in column I where you can make adjustments to this amount. And I'll walk through that in a few minutes, but this is the spot where it's gonna do it. So then we end up with our revenue requirements of the Montana after a CU4 and adjustments. we have the FERC column for the jurisdictional view because we just wanted to create one model. And lastly is the revenue requirement for the combined, or this is just for Montana Electric, and then off to this further out, this is where we added the coal strip. So the column 8P is the coal strip revenue requirement with adjustments that can be made to that to get to a net a revenue requirement after adjustments, and functionalization follows after that. So again, let's follow the number, this 19,983. There was no reduction from coal strip, no change for adjustments, no change with FERC. We end up with 19,983 as our revenue requirement component. We're going to functionalize it. Again, we just talked about this so we have our drop-down menu with all of the functional allocators. It's functionalized. And then we're using the wages and salaries allocator to do that. So let's take a look at that. So we have our wages and salaries excluding A&G allocator, and it's built up from below. So if we go down below here, and it's just tied directly to it, there's no sum F or anything, it's just tied directly to this row. It's coming from the labor study that's part of the model. So we're just pulling those numbers across, and then up above, just doing the math to create the percentages. So the percentages get identified for all of the functions across here, and those get multiplied against the 19,983. And so we end up then with each functional component of that 19,983 based on that wages and salaries allocator. And if we go back to the CU4 version of that too, we had in the source map, we identified, we've got the CU4 plant components. We're bucketizing those into our functional code 300 through 317. So that is 466 million and change in asset. So we go to the functionalized component, we just sort of follow the math here. So we have the CU4 line item. It's pulling it from the source map. So that's sum F rolled up those 9 or 10 entries into the 466 million. It's all related to coal strip. So then we get a zero component in the remaining Montana Electric. And then if we scroll right over to coal strip, so there's that function, and we only have two functions here. So it's either energy or demand, and of course the plant's all in demand. So now I'm going to follow the path of our 19,983 over to the cost of service tab. So this is going to the cost of service without CU4. We put little marks in on column A so you can just sort of control tab down, mix into major sections. We generally zip this up, but to get into the detail, if you just click on the 2 up there, it'll open up. So every single line item, if I close this up again, every line item here corresponds directly to the functionalized line items. So they're, in exact alignment with them. So when they're zipped up, you just see the summary of it. So you see the 19,983. But when we open it up, what we have now is every function is broken out in detail. So think of it on our functionalized tab, we have the functions going across, and then we bring them over to the cost of service tab and think about them rotating 90 degrees basically, so that we have every function available for a class allocator. So if you see these, so the 663 corresponds to the production energy non-CU4, 3243, etc. So you'll find those then just going down the line, and they follow, the same order now vertically that they did horizontally on the functionalized tab. And then we have our drop down to apply the allocator to this now functionalized component of 301. And then you see the result of those as they get allocated to each rate schedule. So it follows a bit of a path to get there, but that's really how we did it. So the prior model that the company worked with before, the MAC model, it does the exact same thing, but instead of it being sort of all available on the spreadsheet in the way that we have it, it goes through like code to loop through and generate the results into various runs of that model. And they're all hard coded data numbers on it, whereas ours is the live data. So you get a live model and can make changes without having to go through some type of run to make that work. Yes, sir. Your hand raised, Michael.
Yes, thank you. You kind of answered my question, but just to confirm this, so these are macro enabled models, but I'm assuming that macro is only tied to the Visual Basic button that you have in the top left corner, and that's just a navigational aid. So the macros don't do anything in the model.
The only other thing is the import tab. So when we're loading up new work papers, these browse and load. And so they're very simple macros to open up a sheet, copy the data and paste it in here, but they do not lead to any answer. We don't have a macro to change the answer. So if you're changing an allocator, making an adjustment, that will just be live and calculate instantly. So,
All right, great. Thank you.
yeah, no problem. Let's take a look at the functional allocators real quick. So again, we mentioned at the top is going to be basically the table that we're pulling the allocators from to multiply against the functions on the functionalized tab. We have then where those come from below. So obviously we have all of our direct assignments. So to assign those directly to a function. Then we build up all of our various things. So the plant allocators are coming, and you can see where they're coming from. They're all coming from the functionalized spreadsheet, some version of that somewhere. And they're all tied directly to that line or a sum of 3 or 4 lines. The wages and salaries come from the labor study on the functionalized tab. Same thing, it's tied directly to those lines. And then a handful of others, a allocation of proposed revenue, property tax. The cash working capital is a number of different functions with a number of different items, operating expense components mainly, and a couple other things. But they're pretty straightforward, should be pretty straightforward, pretty easy to follow. The jurisdictional allocators, again, follows a similar table. Up above and then down below are going to be either the direct assignments or allocations on revenue, transmission demand. Again, some of these are coming from the control or they're coming from the actual sheet. So transmission plant, coming from the functionalized tab to get there. Wages and salaries, etc. Looking at the class allocators again, we have the demand, energy, and customer allocators are all data that was loaded in these, and so you find it in the source map. So there's a work paper for those, and you can find those, the references to those in the source map. So demand, energy, customer. And then we have all of our allocators that come from the cost of service study itself. So wages and salary from the labor study, various plant related, and lots of plant related, lots and lots of plant. And a handful of revenue ones. Some O&M, property tax, customer accounts, etc. So I'd like to walk through next would be the scenario piece of it so that you are able to see the changes that you make in it. The scenario tab, basically we have a width, you know, the not CU4 and the CU4. So the way that this works is basically using this the information from the summary from the live model, so the cost of service less CU4 minus what we have as a base case. So the base case is we have a simple macro here that resets the base case and essentially copies and pastes the tab cost of service, Montana Electric less CU4. It'll copy those as values here onto this sheet here. So then when you're looking at the scenario, you're looking at the live model less the CU4 piece. So to give you a sense of how that works, we have, you know, really two different things that you are able to do. Excuse me, and that's to make the adjustment in the item and or make a change in the allocator. So if I go to the functionalized tab, so the functionalized tab has the spot for all of the adjustments. And we don't have that on the cost of service tab because we need to functionalize that adjustment and then that functional item gets allocated to rates. So it's all takes place here. And so we have our adjustments for Montana Electric without CU4 in column I. And then we have our adjustments to CU4 in column AQ. And the gas model doesn't have that extra block like CU4. So the gas model, those adjustments would be in column I. Or equivalent, I forget, I think we have an extra column or two in here because of the FERC component. So let's take a look at how that works. Let's say for just show an extreme example, I'm going to add $10 million or $100 million into organizations. The model does have a little bit of runtime. The model has a circular reference in it, so that is how we calculate things out. It should open with that, and I'll show you in options in case the model is not. It's giving you a warning for a circular reference. You need to go on to Excel options and under formulas, check on enable iterative calculation. So that needs to be on in order for the circular logic to work. So when I add in $100 million in there, and I look at where it shows up, so it's going to show up in that intangible plant summary bucket. And and when the model really is not doing any math on additional plant, so it's literally adding, a dollar or 100 million or whatever to that bucket. It's not doing any calculations on depreciation expense or anything related to that. It's simply just adding a block of dollars onto that item. So you see the incremental rate base here. Then you'll see some things moving around that may have been tied to a net plant allocator. So you'll see there's some adjustments in regulatory that would have been tied to net plant. So you see there's no zero impact, but you're seeing some dollars moving around. And again, on cash working capital, again, no change in the net, but impacted because of the change in net plant. Then we'll see the results, different changes in revenue, various expense items that end up being tied to net plan allocators. Then the impact on return on rate base, the income didn't change, but the rate base did. And then the impact flowing all the way through into the proposed return. So the incremental return tied to that incremental rate base, and just working through the math of how that all gets allocated at the embedded cost of service. And a different scenario would be to change the allocators. I'll do that. Let's do it on the cost of service tab. Let's do something bigger here. Again, this is a transmission demand component. For some reason, I changed it from transmission demand to, production other. It's going to reallocate those dollars based on that. I can look at the scenario tab. Again, now there's not going to be an incremental change in the revenue requirement, but we're going to see a reallocation of those dollars across the classes and impacting rates of return by class, and impacting the required revenue increase by class. So any questions about the scenario? All right. On the scenario, there's also, again, because we have separate for CU4, this is essentially the same logic, but it's using the CU4 cost of service, and we have a CU4 base case, which is, again, locked down values from the filing submittal. And that's kind of really it. It's pretty simple with a lot of numbers. So I'm happy to go through any more detail in any area that anybody wants to go through. I'll take that as a perfect transfer of knowledge then.
Well, Dave, this is Charlie. Thank you for the presentation. I guess I'm not seeing any questions from anybody. You know, we've been living in it, so we understand it pretty well. But if anybody has any questions, now would be a great time for how it works or how that scenario, which is a handy feature, works.
On behalf of the LCG, I appreciate the opportunity to listen into this presentation. I don't have any questions, but I'm not the smart one on the call. That's Justin. Justin, did you have any questions or anything you wanted to follow up with the NorthWestern team about?
Yeah, just a couple quick questions. On the scenario one, if you hit reset case after you've already made a change, that resets it, and then for your scenario, you're looking at like incremental changes beyond that.
That's correct. So I would, use a clean copy for sure, because you want to preserve the base case of what NorthWestern filed, some version of that. But yeah, if you hit reset case, whatever is the live data will be copied and pasted onto that base case. And so, I guess if you were playing around with it, you could create a new tab in the model to preserve that original base case and go back to it if you need to.
Okay, that's helpful. And then I don't know if we're planning to talk about this today, but I mean, the end result that feeds into the kind of rate design and rate spread is that tab rate design model output data.
That's correct. Yep.
Are we planning to talk today about what happens with that data as it flows through into the next model, or is today focused on the electric? Or
Today,
sorry, on the cost
yep.
of service?
Yep. So today's just cost of service. So if we need a schedule, a review of the rate design model, we're certainly NorthWestern is able to do that for us. So.
So the NorthWestern team, I guess we'll just sort of ask, I don't know, Glenda, on my video, it looked like David was referring to you, but that's just where your pictures were. Is that something that we can set up? I don't know whether the staff or the others might also be interested in that, but it sounds like something that at least the LCG team might find helpful.
Yeah, we can discuss that with the PSC staff if they'd like to set up another technical meeting to walk through the rate design module.
Great.
Just a quick question in terms of like moving from one to the other. Would you use the same kind of like browse and load functions in the rate design? You just are now referring to some version of the cost of service that you've saved.
That's exactly right. So that browse, then you select the file. When you hit load, it'll bring in that summary. So we've got it broken down into the various buckets that then translates into the components that get used in the rate design. Exactly right.
So, Will, if we set something up with NorthWestern to visit a little bit about that, is that something that either the staff wants to coordinate or the staff wants to be involved with?
Yes, I think our attorneys prefer, I mean, I think from staff's perspective, we did it this way because this allows us to participate. Our attorneys feel more comfortable if the commission sort of notices and hosts the technical conference if staff's going to participate. So I guess it could go either way. I think we would love to observe something like that. So we'd be happy to follow this same format and set up a technical conference on the rate design model as well.
I think that I'm delighted to defer to your process. Happy to have your engagement. So, Charles, is that something that you can maybe coordinate timing on?
Sorry, I have to double check. We're all in the same room and I don't want to unmute if Glenda's already unmuted. So it takes me a second to find her on the screen and make sure we're not muted.
I called on Glenda the first time and you answered, and then I called on you and now you're putting it to Glenda. You guys are
Yes.
confusing.
Yeah. We're happy to work with Will and staff to set that up. I think it would be a good model to walk through also.
Okay. That'd be great. I don't feel like it needs to be an ocean of time. But I think that the walkthrough we had on this first one was very helpful. So if you guys can coordinate scheduling on that and we'll just make sure we can make sure Justin is available for that as well, that'd be great.
Yeah, thank you, Thor.
But it sounds like that's it for the LCG.
Anybody else have any questions?
Maybe just one. This is Jason Brown with MCC. Thank you, David. You had said that this was developed, I guess, with Northwestern for transparency and with, those kind of goals in mind. Can you give us a sense of whether this exact model is being used by other utilities, or is this kind of a first deployment of this kind of custom model?
No, it's been deployed since our first installation of it was probably 5 years ago. So since then we've deployed it at a number of electric, gas, and water companies.
Okay.
We've replaced the MAC model in some of them. We've replaced the UI model in a handful of places, and some homegrown ones too. So.
Okay. And would you say it's something that can kind of be pulled off the shelf between rate cases?
Yeah, I mean, typically, as long as the structure of their business doesn't change substantially, I wouldn't see much changing. The work papers might change. That's why we create that source map to create some flexibility around the work papers. But the functions and the rows are unlikely to change. Those are kind of standard FERC items, unless there was like a significant change to the business, for like the some entities we've seen have added some more breakout on some of the battery storage functions, battery storage line items and things like that. But, unless there was some substantial change in the business, the model should be pretty similar year to year or case to case.
Okay. Yeah, thank you. And apologies if I missed this, but why was the coal strip stuff broken out separately?
Because it is a different rate of return. And so it's a different revenue requirement. So the way that our model works, we had to figure out some way to separate it that way. So we wanted to keep it so that the functionalized tab had a lineup to the total company so that you could see how it goes from total company to Montana Electric and CU4. And that was just the cleanest way for us to kind of keep that together on the functionalization piece. But then we had to create a separate cost of service because that's just how our model works to be able to provide all that information. So.
Okay. Oh, that's helpful.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It was in the MAC model, it was pretty buried. And it would have, from an intervener standpoint, I understand how this stuff works, and I don't know how you all were able to parse through some of that from before, because it's complicated when you can't see the math. So
Right. And in terms of the jurisdictional cost split, is that all an input for you? Or do you actually, or I should say, are your inputs actually functionalizing like generation plant, for example, that might be serving wholesale loads? Or do you just apply the sort of credit that you're given in terms of the overall sharing of costs? Does that make sense?
So if you're asking specifically around how the allocators are developed, that's a NorthWestern question. From a model function, we're just simply utilizing, the to move those dollars out of transmission and into the FERC component based on the demand allocator, wage salary allocator, et cetera. There was some adjustments we had to make just to, there's some components of plant and expense that we had to have as manual entries, which is why you see those on the control. It just made it easier to have them on that sheet instead of having them be buried somewhere else in the model to make that work.
Okay. Thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Yeah, no problem.
Well, if there aren't any other questions, then I think we can conclude this technical conference. I really appreciate everybody showing up and appreciate NorthWestern's time and your consultants' time. It was a helpful walkthrough, and we will work on getting something scheduled for the rate design model. All right, thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Will.
Thanks, everyone.